All right, that's enough. That's enough. Thank you guys so much for. Wow. This is crazy that I got to do this, and I got to be here. I can't thank you enough for this, Eugene, and again, you, Steven, and God, Chloe and Lisa. Thank you guys so much, and Terry and Michael, and God, thank God for Roscoe and Louise. Weren't they great in the movie? I mean, wasn't. Well, okay, no questions. Drive safe, everybody. Good night.
Not going to get off that easy, Elvis. Congratulations again.
Thank you.
Steven, thank you for being here. Elvis, you know, a sort of natural question, if there were anybody else in this chair, I would probably start by saying, tell me about the origin of the project, and the origin of the film. But in this case, as I was rewatching a bit of it tonight, and I've been thinking about it a lot and thinking about this conversation, the answer is pretty obvious to me, but tell me what you think. The origin of the project is your life in cinema, to me.
That's absolutely it. I mean, it's this thing, talking about this yesterday in the panel. As a critic, you know, critical thinker about movies, you ask yourself, what's not there? What's not being said? And so much of that, being a person of color, is imputing things and looking for inference and making that joke that, you know, if you're a girl watching horror movies as a black person, you go, well, all the black people left already. We were too smart to stick around. And wondering why, if everybody goes to see movies. And to me, one of the most stunning clips in the film is hearing Dr. King talk about not being able to see movies when he grew. I mean, you think about that. And that's about how pervasive the effect of movies is. And movies are, forgive me. And to have to create a culture. I mean, so much, there's that joke about black culture, use every part of the pig but the oink. So when heroism is thrown away by the mainstream, we sort of take it and refashion it for ourselves. And it was interesting watching the movie again, Steven. It happened by kind of inadvertence that Ossie Davis ends up being the hero of the film. And it wasn't a plan, but it's just as things fell away and pieces fell away, you sort of see this guy who never gave up. And these are, so much of this is just stuff I want to say. Again, a lot of black culture is about responding to things. And when that book, Easy Riders, Raging Bulls, came out, I just thought, well, this should be really interesting because it's about that period. And I can't wait to see how they use black people in the movie. And a friend said, there is no mention of black people in the movie, in that book whatsoever. And I just said, that is not possible. Because at one point, John Calley, who ran Warner Brothers in the 70s, he said to me, the dirty little secret of American films is that black films subsidized American movies in the 1970s. And that, and the fact that when you see these compendiums of the greatest clips of all time, that you never see that extraordinary clip of Billy Dee Williams. If that's not a piece of movie star entrance, I don't know what is. I mean, before he even like leans to the frame, you see the gleam on his fingertips. I mean, he's treated like it's like the entrance of the Millennium Falcon. It's extraordinary to see this. Again, he's tickled by it, and just that so much of these moments that are entrances, these moments that are, as you would say, movie moments, Stephen, that have never been enshrined. When people write about movies and talk about what the great scenes in the great movies, and one of the things that was sort of key to me to just include these movies, I want this movie to feel like every 5 minutes you kind of go, wait, what? What? Huh? What? I mean, that thing, too, about the music, that black soundtracks affected the movies until now. Because they made the sale and commerce of soundtracks an immutable fact in movie marketing. That just sort of came because black filmmakers knew not to wait around. And also because Curtis Mayfield didn't know you couldn't release a soundtrack before the movie came out. And it was his label, so he just did that.
Yeah, and I think picking up on that, I mean, I think about studying film. I went to UCLA in the mid-'80s, early 90s, and I think about like learning about so much that's in your movie, but only in threads. So a thread here, a particular film or a performance, a thread over here, but no one fully weaving it together into something that could be looked at as a whole piece or a whole story or a whole movement. That's what you're doing here, that it isn't explored in the way that you're talking about it, the idea of putting it all together. And again, it's your lived experience, so you've been putting it all together. tell me about how you and Steven, tell me about early conversations the two of you had, or early conversations that led to taking this down the road of becoming a documentary. For either one of you.
Oh God, I want to say as little as possible and let Elvis talk, but it really grew out of a series of conversations that we were having, and the subject felt unexplored in a sort of serious way in documentary terms. So finally, I said, let's go try and get this made. That's a story in itself. But Netflix, I have to say, was so supportive. It's a lot. This thing, it's a lot, you know, and sculpting it was tricky. And Elvis was very calm, and it evolved rapidly and often, and that's a testament to him. So I'm thrilled with it. I think it's great. I can say that because it's his.
I mean, there's just so much to try to say about it. There's so many things I thought. I mean, there's that thing by Alvarez, you know, now the thing that short 1965 about the riots, and that looking at the riots in the way that weren't being viewed in the mainstream, and then seeing Night of the Living Dead and just saying, oh my God, it's the riots, it's Medgar Evers, it's Malcolm, it's all these things, and this kind of import that was never given. But also, there's a point I was trying to do this as a book, and I should say I was turned down by every publisher in America, probably twice by some. And then Toni Morrison offered to write the introduction, and we were just at dinner, and she was just, when I told her I wanted to do this, she goes, well, I'll write the introduction. I just went, who are you talking to? And she goes, no, I'll do it. And she just went on, and I just started grabbing napkins to write down the things she was saying when she's talking about Pam Grier and what that music did, and how funny it was to watch Earth, Wind & Fire go from Sweetback to That's the Way of the World. And then we got to the whole conversation about Melvin being this guy who said, if you treat it like it's a black movie, nobody will write about it. So you have to treat it like it's a phenomenon. And so the selling of the movie, including, I think the greatest thing of all time, that he repurposed the X rating. But again, this is all these things that black movies do. And then following his example, 20 years later comes Spike Lee, and then 35 years ago, Robert Townsend with Hollywood Shuffle. Them understanding you have to turn the story of the making of the film into the story, because if it's a black film, nobody cares, or it's written about in the most reductive terms. And what I really wanted to do with this is to show how many different kinds of black movies there were. That there's Killer of Sheep, I mean, God, maybe one of the most beautiful movies ever made that came out of this period. But also, and I'm thankful Louise is here, Symbiote. I mean, you see that movie, it was one of those things that before the internet, it was a rumor. Have you seen Take One? I've heard about Take One. Have you seen it? And then I ended up being on a plane with Steve Buscemi, and it just came up out of nowhere. He goes, yeah, I know Bill. Why don't we bring him over to your house? He's got the movie on cassettes. So he's got it on 2 cassettes. I made barbecue and we watched the movie. And your jaw drops watching it, because it's so inventive in real time. It's playing with a medium that shows you're in the hands of a master, somebody who understands both sides of the camera, somebody who understands storytelling and our reaction to storytelling. And you can't tell me one way or another that Sacha Baron Cohen didn't somehow just absorb that into his bloodstream. I was just talking to David last week, Fincher, and I asked him if he had ever seen this chase scene in Superfly, because I tell you, seeing this as a kid, it's the first movie that awakened me to filmmaking technique, because it's all a single take. He's wearing that suede suit that he never wears again, so he obviously trashed it during that chase sequence. And that's Jim Senior really go, oh yeah, we borrowed that suit. We didn't know how to tell a guy we ruined his suit. But I mean, you can even see on the big screen when he jumps up on the fire escape, his hands are shaking from all that adrenaline from the run and the jump over the fence in 3-inch heels. Oh my gosh. And there's just so much of that movie is about invention. And and there's so many stories that we didn't get a chance to get into, and the heartbreak of this is it took so long to get it done that we lost people, but I couldn't have been better served than having the people we do in this film, to have Stan Lathan talk about what I think is a great lost documentary, Save the Children, or that Curtis Mayfield. I mean, those 5 soundtracks over the course of a decade would be an achievement that most people would die for. To have made 2 albums a year, and arguably, I think the greatest soundtrack of the 1970s, which is Superfly, which is also, in addition to everything else, a soundtrack that's responding to the movie. It's the amount of invention that went on during this period that is always so often dismissed as blaxploitation. And I didn't want to give people a license to say that here, because it's not blaxploitation. To see Zendaya talking about how she's absorbed Diana Ross into her perspective, into her purview, into her aesthetic. There's just, I'm sorry. I still have a lot to say about this, I guess.
I'm glad you do. And I want to give some folks in the audience a chance to ask you about it as well. So if you don't mind taking some questions, I think we have microphones.
That's basically it. And I'm glad you actually asked that question, because I wanted to make it about this 10-year period, because so often when it comes to black culture, somebody goes, a century of black films. No, let's not do that. Let's not try to sum a century up into a single issue of Entertainment Weekly. So open the wise here from the magazine. Or some special or something. I mean, the fact is that this period was instrumental, because it between Night of the Living Dead, which, again, each of these movies that are successes don't seem to translate into people going, let's institutionalize this. And for the failure of The Wiz, because you got to think that people are looking for a way, and it's proven itself to be sinisterly true, to not deal with black culture, because it scares them, because they didn't know any black people. And this was a studio executive who said to me in the early 90s, yeah, black people just don't want to see themselves in historical dramas. And I say, you base it knowing on how many black people? Well, it's just the information we have. And came from where? Well, the information we have. And again, you think from 1978, there were like a handful. This is the failure of Ragtime, which was an attempted to do something like that studio-wise, but the return of James Cagney got all the attention. It's really not until 86 with Spike Lee, who does what Melvin Van Peebles did. And then Robert Townsend, who did what Spike and Melvin Van Peebles did. And so what happens, though, and I'm sort of terrified about this, is every decade it's the renaissance of black film. We're never going to go back. Better than ever. We're going to give all this talent a chance. And then there are a couple of box office failures. And it's like, so I've always said this, that black success in pop culture is the equivalent of finding a $100 bill in the subway. It's a non-repeatable phenomenon. That's the way it's viewed in a lot of executive suites. Unfortunately, Netflix wasn't the kind of place for that, but there are a lot of other places where it is. And that's why this decade and that period. Listen, I so love that what's up here, and I'm so shocked that I got to make this movie. That you guys are still here. Feels like the strangest dream I've ever had. I expect to wake up on the freeway wandering in my pajamas. How did this happen? No, I mean, the fun of it was trying to build this in a way that kept this thing in motion, because, it's like movie history is itself a series of digressions. You can't talk about this movie without talking about that movie. So even though it's strictly speaking, it is chronological, and there's so many things that I love that are in the movie, like the story of Rupert Cross, who's this guy who, if you listen to Jack, I swear I believe this to be true. If you listen to Jack Nicholson sort of snarl in that voice, that's not New Jersey. That's somebody who grew up in Jamaica who's trying to figure out how to sound like an American. And that kind of mirthless laugh that Cross does in Faces, you see I would swear to you, my guess is, in those acting classes they took together, that you can hear Nicholson doing Rupert Cross and Bob Town influenced by the way he deported himself. I mean, he's a hugely influential figure. And Diana Sands, who, She starred in The Owl and the Pussycat on Broadway with Alan Alda in the early 60s. And when they turned it into a movie, she was forgotten. And you just see that radiance that she's got on screen. And you hear that enormously evocative way that Roscoe speaks of her. You can sort of feel her as he's talking about her. I'm just happy with the stuff we have, and I got to make this. That's coming out on Netflix November 11th. Tell your friends.
One aspect of this, Elvis and Steven, that I can't help but overlook is this idea that, well, like, okay, so let me frame something. 68, take one in 1968, an outlier, might have been considered one at the time. 78, Killer Sheep, Charles Burnett, an outlier. Spike Lee comes along within a decade, comes from nowhere.
But Ganja and Hess,
yeah,
an outlier. I
So-
mean, there's one every year.
The thread that I'm thinking about is I'm sitting here and as I was rewatching and really like puzzling over this is, I love that you leave the film at sort of at the doorstep of what will become the independent cinema movement of this country. Barry Jenkins, Moonlight, winning Best Picture, an outlier, and yet you can't watch this movie without seeing all these outliers as part of a much bigger story. And you know, Steven, Sex, Lies, and Videotape starts independent film, but there's like these threads that just like that we have to reframe. This is what I'm thinking. We have to reframe how we think about the history of the medium that we all celebrate.
Oh, yeah. I think you have to question all of it. And that's part of what we talked about, is how to be critical and celebratory at the same time. And that was a constant, subject of discussion during the edit. And like I said, Elvis was very fluid. We could come up with an idea of how to change how he was talking about something. He'd go in the next room, record it, come back. It's in the cut. We can look at it. It was very fluid.
That this film exists as an object for all those who study film from today forward is not only exciting but essential, I think.
God, thank you. Because I guess I feel this way about it too, that it's about film, but it's also about the social and cultural impact that Black life has had on this country. My fear is, because this thing that happens so often with Black culture, is that there's a reductive eye train towards it. I mean, I hate to use this word, but it becomes binary. It's this or this. And it's all these things. It's so many things, Yeah. And I think the resilience of what we think was being American independent film comes from that period. Yeah, I thought the poster stuff was a really big part of it. I mean, there's nothing funnier to me than the legend of Black Charlie, that poster, which I just remember if you like see people walking through downtown Detroit, everybody stopped to look at that thing, like everybody, because it was this beautiful sort of culture clash and really sort of daring and confrontational. And those posters were in some ways kind of a shell game, telling you about a movie that wasn't there. But as often as not, those posters were celebratory too. I mean, that's what I'm hoping people get from this. I mean, I don't want this to be a lecture or me pitting you against the wall and saying, well, it's this and this and this. And, a lot of this was me thinking about stuff I wanted to get into the movie. I mean, like when I saw Nipsey Hussle talking about the Spook Who Sat, I think whenever I get this made, that's going in there. So at a certain point, you just start writing stuff down in notebooks. And as Terry probably knows, I got like 3 satchels full of notebooks with stuff, ideas written down and stuff I wanted to use in this. But I have to say, for me, the greatest thing in this is to make a case, to bookend the movie really with Charles Burnett on one end and Harry Belafonte on the other. I mean, has anybody here ever seen Odds Against Tomorrow? You've got to see this movie because it's extraordinary. Like, everybody in the movie is in love with him. I mean, there's the elevator operator who's flirting with him in the elevator. And then, you know, as a kid, I remember seeing The Godfather and going, wait, that's the guy who tried to pick up Harry Belafonte in Oz Against Tomorrow. That's Al Neary? That's crazy. And also, the movie's not judging him. It's just the fact that he's in love with Harry. But, you know, the point of the movie is that, you know, for all this, him being the sexual center of the movie, that he's basically been abandoned by society. This is a movie that's got Cicely Tyson with no dialogue. She's just like a face in the movie. An actor who later went on to be in MASH, Wayne Rogers, makes his debut in this movie. I mean, the amount of talent, and he's doing an incredible job of playing the vibes. It's the amount of talent expended on this movie. Should have, even as a financial failure, it should have been such a success d'estime that it ensured him a film career, and that he had the presence of mind and determination to say, rather than do this thing I want to do more than anything else, instead of demeaning my people, I won't do it. That's extraordinary to me. But also, and Steven, as we wrestle with this, trying to figure out a way to get Sidney Poitier into the movie. I just thought, how do you do this? Because he is somebody to be celebrated. But I want to try to come up with a way to, I think, try to say it in a way that nobody else had. And I met him like a handful of times. He would say, young man, good to see you. I can't talk to you. And then he talked to me for 3 hours. It's like, if I can just record this on my phone. No. I don't have anything else to say, but let me tell you this. And he was just so generous about being ungenerous that it was a beautiful thing. But as we were standing at the LA Film Festival, like my legs were getting tired from standing, and he was still standing there talking. I just said, so it's crazy to me that you made 5 movies in a row that signaled your comeback, but also about guys who have to pretend to be somebody else. And then that turns into a long conversation. It's like, that became the thing. Because again, there is not another person in film history who had that kind of career, who basically scrambled to be part of the mainstream, just be in movies in general, to become the biggest movie star in the world, to the next year being irrelevant, to the next year being ridiculed, to 4 years later being a big movie star again. At the end of the decade, he's back where he started. I mean, it's unreal. I mean, there's so many. I guess one of the things that comes to mind is just, again, some movies have gotten this extraordinary short shrift, is The Learning Tree, which in visual terms is just extraordinary. That shot of those boys on the bank after the kid's been killed, which is a stunning moment. And that it's rendered as his photographs were for the WPA when he was shooting for the government. I mean, he knew what he was doing. But these scenarios, these scenes have this incredible graphic vitality. I mean, you see that scene of those kids walking to those riders with the sun coming up. It's mind-blowing. I mean, and then the movie's full of stuff like that. It's just, he was so inventive in visual terms. And then to go from that to using the stock he used to shoot Shaft at the beginning. I mean, I think he's somebody who, as a film technician, has never got his due. But I have to say, one of my favorite things to do in this is to connect Walk On By with Sergio Leone. That was thrilling to me. I love doing that.
Nice. Elvis, thank you for being here. Thank you for bringing the film.
I can't thank you enough,
Steven,
Eugene.
thank you for being here.